Hey gang, Ronan here. As you can see in this game, I am playing the Tier 7 Spanish cruiser Asturias. I have to say that playing the Tier 7 and Tier 8 Spanish cruiser, I was not a fan at all. Now there are some new things about these ships. As you can see at the bottom of your screen, there are torpedoes with a decent 8-kilometer range. You've got with the F key, you've got a rapid reload function, which you would think would be very useful, especially with the 203s that this ship has in terms of armament. If you're used to, for example, the Japanese cruiser line, the 203s there they can cut through a lot. They seem to do a lot more damage. These are, at least the AP shells, very ineffective, and unfortunately I feel the same way about the HE. For whatever reason, they just don't pack that much of a punch. So, I'll give you the breakdown on this ship. This is not a really exciting game. I had very few really exciting games in this ship, or in fact, the Tier 8 in this line. Excuse me. But to give you the rundown, you've got on this ship, you've got 4 turrets, 2 barrels on each turret, with a 13-second reload, which is pretty awful. And now the rapid reload, which you're not going to see a lot of use of here, primarily because this is one of the early games that I played in this line, and I wasn't familiar enough with it to make use of it effectively. And I'm not sure how many opportunities there were either. I mean, I know there was at least one where I could have, but so we've got a total of 8 barrels, 203s, with the kind of lengthy 13-second reload. To me, one of the worst things about this ship and the Tier 8 is the turret traverse, which is practically battleship slow. The base turret traverse on this ship is 25.71 seconds. Now, if you think about it for a minute, you've got 8-kilometer torps. If you're getting close enough to use the torps effectively, even if somebody's pushing at you, let's say you launch them and you're 12 kilometers away from somebody who's just kind of moving toward you, trying to maneuver and keep your guns on the target, it's going to be very difficult. Take a look at the traverse right now of the rear turrets. In that way, it is a lot like the Japanese cruiser line. Very slow turret traverse. But you have a little bit more range on the torpedoes in the Japanese cruiser line, and I think you have a little bit more range on the guns in the Japanese cruiser line. The range on these guns is kind of anemic. I had a very hard time using this ship or the Tier 8 without getting kind of more or less constantly blapped. Now, why do I say that? Because these ships are very squishy. I mean, Tier 9 British light cruiser Neptune levels of squishy, if you're familiar. So, there were times when I was angled very well in this ship and the Tier 8. Kiting, trying to make use of the guns against targets that were pushing up, following after me. I had a hard time lighting fires. I had a hard time doing any damage, and pretty much every heavy cruiser or battleship shell that landed on either this or the Tier 8 just punched right through and did big damage. So I digress. So we talked about 8 barrels, 13-second reload, not very good range, 14.3 kilometers. Max dispersion is great, 131 meters at that 14.3 kilometer range, but getting the opportunity to use the guns effectively is dangerous because these ships are so squishy. Now the max HE shell damage is 2850, which, that's not too bad with a 15% chance of starting a fire. I did not find them especially good fire starters. Now, in the tier 9 and tier 10, that changed quite a bit, and I actually really like those two. But the grind is painful, so just, kind of be advised. The initial HE shell velocity on these guns is 900 meters per second. And then we get to the AP, which does good damage if you get an opportunity to catch, in particular, cruisers at close range with a broadside. Because the max AP shell damage is 4,800. But I found that even with broadside targets at like range 10, the AP shells really lacked punch. It's very difficult to find opportunities. Now you're going to see what I'm talking about as far as squishiness. Granted, I'm flat broadside, and I was kind of hoping that the Andrea Doria was going to stay focused on that Vladivostok, because most of us know the Russian battleship line in general, if caught broadside by another battleship, is going to eat big citadels. But rather than hit the Vladivostok, that Andrea Doria player decided to shoot at me. But you saw that it did pretty big damage, and that I actually consider myself lucky. I have literally been one-shotted by battleships at that kind of range on a pretty regular basis during the time that I was playing this thing. So, I eventually reached the point where I was playing at kind of max range the majority of the time and trying to put myself in a position where I was kiting anytime I wasn't able to use cover. Now, in this situation, I can see we've got Gaida pushing up, chasing our New Mexico. Fubuki is trying to put torpedoes in the face of the hipper Arizona Tirpitz. And at this point, it looks like this game's pretty much over, right? I mean, the red team's lost 5 ships. We've only lost 2. And in fact, this game does turn out to be a real blowout, but it does kind of give you an illustration of how cautiously I ended up having to play this ship and the Tier 8. And I wish that I had the Tier 8 example that I planned to use, but unfortunately, with the recent update, I just wasn't able to get it converted and turned into a video before the update, which meant that replay was no longer any good to me. So, I've talked to you about the guns. I've talked to you about, on paper, they look like they do pretty good damage, but they're really not that effective. I've put 37 shells on target, and I've done less than 36,000 damage, and that includes 2 torpedo hits. Now, I have started 2 fires, but out of 37 shells, I think that's a little less than 15%, right? So, the gun's just very underwhelming. Now, the torpedoes, we can talk about that a little bit. You do have 8 torpedoes on this ship, and the reload time is 106 seconds. So, again, on paper, it looks like, hey, I'll be able to get some use out of that. And if you're top tier and you're playing against Tier 6 and Tier 5, maybe, even if you're mid-tier. But, which is the case here, you might get an opportunity to use them. And I actually did it, right, against the cruiser. But it's uncommon. AA, well, you do have a fighter, which, that's of limited effectiveness if a CV really decides to come after you. And very often I've discovered in this ship, if I'm playing against a CV, it's a Tier 8, and they just kind of walk all over you. And that was also true for the Tier 8. Now, the max speed on the ship, 35 knots, not too bad. But the turning circle radius is a huge 860 meters. So the lack of ability to turn effectively is a huge detriment. And another reason why I ended up very often, and there's an opportunity I should have been using the rapid reload function. Again, this was, I don't know, maybe my 3rd game in the ship. But if you get caught, you turn so slowly in this thing that anybody that knows the ship or the line really, knows, well, we just have to wait. He's either going to stay nose into me and attempt to try and rush at me with torps, and as soon as he turns to use the torps, I'm going to be able to finish him. Or he's going to try and get away now, and I'll just hold fire until I have his broadside, and then I can maybe one-shot him. I mean, battleships can just slap this thing around. So that is kind of the basic rundown on the ship. I can give you the pros and cons according to the World of Warships wiki. The pros: high amount of HP for a cruiser, and it bleeds away so quickly. Guns have flat ballistics, that's true. AP shells have good armor penetration and damage. I did not find that to be the case at the Tier 7 or 8, which has basically the same guns. Has access to burst fire, allowing her to deal damage in quick succession. Now, it can be very effective. If you catch somebody and you can get a couple volleys off, especially if you have somebody's broadside, it can be devastatingly effective. Make no mistake. The number of opportunities you're going to get to use that in this, at least in my opinion, in this ship or the Tier 8 in this line, are going to be pretty minimal. Because if you make good use of it, and I really should have used the reload here, if you make good use of it, you're putting yourself in jeopardy. And these things are so squishy that that's usually going to be fatal.
Torpedos a proa. Destructor enemigo aniquilado.
I had anticipated the torpedoes. That's the only thing that saved me there. Okay, so to finish the pros, torpedoes have a fast reload, and great maximum speed, which I touched on, and access to the repair party, and you definitely need it. Cons: poor armor. That is an understatement and a half. Burst fire has a long cooldown. It does.
That was a great battle.
Long rudder shift time and large turning circle, short-range torpedoes, below average AA, and poor concealment. So it doesn't take a rocket scientist to know that these can be very challenging to play effectively. I'm going to try and get a shot off on this Arizona here. This game's over. But it does, at least it gives us a background for me to be able to give you an explanation of these ships. Now, while I still have you, I can tell you the Tier 8, for me at least, was a very similar experience with the Tier 9. When you get to the Andalusia, you move into 234 millimeter guns, and they do more damage. They have better pen. The ship's armor is a little bit better. It was very fun to play. I actually really liked the Andalusia at Tier 9. The Tier 7 and Tier 8 were a painful experience for me. And then at Tier 10, you've got the Castilla, which has even better guns. In the Castilla, you're picking up 254s. They still have the same 13-second reload, but they do a lot more damage. And max HE shell damage is 3450 with a 16% chance of fire. Initial shell velocity on those, 954 meters per second. And the AP, which has much better penetration, is 6150 per shell. Better armor. The Tier 9, I really enjoyed playing the Tier 9. I'll probably circle back around and play that some more because it was very fun. But the grind to get to it was really painful and very frustrating. So, there you are, my very rapid reload explanation of my experience with the Spanish cruiser line. I hope you enjoyed this. If you did, please like and subscribe. I'd love to see any comments that you may have of your experience down below, and I'll see you next time. Yeah, look at that. 62 shells, 28,000 damage, less than 28,000 damage. Thanks again for watching. See you next time.